Story 1. Being burned alive is quite bad, but I probably wouldn't want to be tortured to death. The worst method might be where a bucket filled with rats is heated on your chest, and once the bucket gets too hot, the rats begin digging into your skin. Story 2. Nutty Putty Cave Incident except somewhere else. Story 3. Dying from cancer. Someone I knew had a problem with sinus in 2017. Later, he was diagnosed with cancer and unfortunately, he passed away on October 19, 2018. Story 4. Falling overboard and getting eaten by a shark must be horrendous. Either that or falling into a sarlacc pit for 1,000 years. No, thank you. Story 5. Anything that I am aware is going to happen makes me more scared of knowing I am about to die than death itself. A kidnapping and gruesome murder would be among my greatest fears. Story 6. As a scuba diver, drowning is a serious concern. If that happens, it is due to user error or carelessness, such as not pre-checking my equipment beforehand or exceeding my limits. Story 7. Being burned alive needs to be mentioned, but being eaten alive is a death that I really don't think can be topped. I remember seeing a scene from a zombie movie when I was younger, possibly from The Walking Dead, where the zombies attack a man and start eating from his midsection. He's wailing in pain through it all, and that has got to be the worst way to go. Story 8. Being bitten by an ant, you slowly become a giant ant, and your ant lungs cannot breathe at their scale, so you simply suffocate. Story 9. Drowning? Being dragged behind a car until you die? Forced to sit in an enclosed box where the cramps start to hurt, and then you are left to starve to death? Skinned alive and soaked in lemon juice, ultimately dying from blood loss? Story 10. I would not want to be found dead in the woods with a sex toy, as it might be declared a suicide. I'm not into that. Story 11. Becoming untethered from my spacecraft and watching it shrink as I drift away into an inky black void, until my oxygen eventually runs out and I suffocate. Story 12. We took my mother-in-law off life support after she fell and hit her head, spending 7 weeks in a coma. It took her 27 days to pass away once we turned off the machines. It was absolute torture to watch her starve and dehydrate, while begging her to let go. Story 13. It varies, but anything slow and painful like Hisashi Aoki, who slowly fell apart due to radiation poisoning. Story 14. Slowly bleeding from a hangnail. Why is fingernail or nail bed trauma one of the worst pains in the world? Does anyone else forget how much it hurts until the next time it happens? Story 15. I was raped and then murdered or murdered and then raped. I think being killed by anyone, even if it wasn't intentional, is significant. If I am killed, it means it was someone else's choice that ended my life. If it was an accident, it would irritate me because a small mistake could be the reason I died. Story 16. I immediately thought of the experts in pain and torture. Catholicism in its earlier days featured many notable examples. A memorable figure was Giordano Bruno, who had the courage to assert that the sun did not revolve around the earth, similar to Galileo. This belief was classified as heresy, and he was tortured and killed. They ensured he could not speak after a forced confession by having his tongue restrained by a metal device. For me, anything designed by religion to cause death would be the worst. They are truly experts in this area. Story 17. Dying slowly and painfully in a hospital bed from illness is a fear I hold. Although I am healthy now, the possibility of facing such a fate in old age terrifies me. The concept of death is frightening, so I am doing everything I can to take care of myself to ensure a long, healthy life. Story 18. Being flayed. I heard you either die from blood loss or hypothermia. I can't even imagine how excruciating the process is and what the aftermath would feel like. Story 19. As a first responder, I have seen some gruesome deaths, but 2 cases stand out. One involved severe stomach bleeding, and the other involved significant lung bleeding. Both patients were conscious during the incidents. They bled heavily from their mouths and were unable to speak. Both struggled and panicked through their homes before collapsing and ultimately bleeding to death. These were horrific sights, and it must have been a horrifying way to die. It still gives me shivers. Story 20. Any death is worse than the results of near death, in my opinion. The death of old age seems technically impossible if the specifics of system shutdown could be partially changed to indefinitely extend longevity. However, in my opinion, death by old age is the worst. Story 21. I would say the worst is a death that feels unfair or unresolved when there is no closure or understanding. Can leave a lot of pain behind. Story 22. Drowning. I experienced it firsthand in a severe Humvee rollover incident into a sewage pit. Story 23. Lung cancer is a slow and painful disease that causes a loss of control over bodily functions. You may find yourself in a hospital bed, struggling with incontinence and excessive drooling. Attempts to regain control can lead to frequent coughing fits until you lose consciousness. While visitors are kind, it is difficult not to be aware of how they perceive you. Your dignity often fades long before your life does. To make matters worse, many hospitals may not allow you to choose to end your suffering. Story 24. Suffocation. A desperate struggle for air, with each breath becoming increasingly difficult. The panic and helplessness make it frightening. Story 25. I have seen all manner of death, and death itself does not scare me. I have an utterly pragmatic view of it, and it has become extremely normalized in my family, which I love. That being said, any death involving endless suffering scares me. Some people have mentioned being burned alive. I think that would be horrible. Pancreatic cancer scares me a little. Story 26. Alzheimer's and dementia. Spending my whole life building a family only to not remember them at the end sounds terrible. Story 27. Any type of death that is slow and painful is particularly distressing, especially if one is aware of it happening for most of the time until the end. However, the worst kind of death is one that goes unnoticed and is met with indifference. Story 28. Dying during surgery would be terrible because you go in aware of the risks, yet hopeful for a positive outcome. The worst part might be not knowing that you are dying. Story 29. I used to work at a funeral home, and mold poisoning was the most unsettling for me. For weeks, your body breaks down as you fight in vain to survive. You vomit as your insides dissolve. But dying alone is another kind of horrific. It's not just facing the void alone, but also the fact that no one knows you passed for days, weeks, or even months. Working these cases was biologically horrific to witness, but more so socially horrific. There won't be a viewing, as you are not recognizable. Funeral directors cremate you immediately, and instead of the solemn mourning every other body receives, these bodies are taped up in multiple bags, and people only speak of the smell, not the person. I live alone, and I'm always haunted by the question, how long would it take for anyone to realize I'm gone? Story 30. Suffocating is my greatest fear. This fear is not unfounded, as I have severe lung sarcoidosis, which has severely affected my lungs. Story 31. Hospice medical professional here. Watching someone die from kidney and liver failure due to alcoholism is long, painful, and torturous. Not to mention the mental agony of regret. Story 32. There was one in the book series Red Rising, standing in a box with hundreds of razor-sharp needles inserted an inch from your skin. You just have to not move. It sounds absolutely terrifying. Story 33. Death of the self. Being slowly and systematically manipulated into being something you're not by the people you were supposed to trust the most, namely family. Story 34. I underwent a procedure that went horribly wrong, rendering me unable to speak. Story 35. The worst is probably skinning or burning, but if I had to choose a phobia of mine, it would be getting stuck in a small cave, like when people get trapped upside down for 24 hours and can't move. I have severe arthritis, and not being able to pop and crack my joints for more than 5 minutes is absolute torture. Story 36. Immolation. Also, a slow death by locked-in syndrome. I would be begging for euthanasia if that happened to me. Story 37. The slow death of a relationship occurs when communication is non-existent, yet no real negative issues exist. Story 38. Fatal familial insomnia. You will not be able to sleep, and you will slowly lose your mind until you eventually die. Story 39. It took 10 years for Parkinson's to take my dad's life. A decade of misery for him, my mom, and us grown children. I don't want to inflict that on myself or my family, so I would prefer something much quicker. Story 40. Drowning in hot fryer oil. Feeling your face melt while being forced to inhale hot oil into your lungs for your last breath. I work in a kitchen. Story 41. Dementia, Alzheimer's, or terminal cancer can be incredibly difficult to endure. Watching someone you care for deeply slowly deteriorate before your eyes is heartbreaking. You always cherish the good times over the difficult moments, but the image and memory of how things were before the end never fade away. Story 42. In the book Shogun by James Clavell, the first death we witness involves a main character boiling someone alive in a large vat. In the television show, they depict his skin sloughing off. This occurs in the first episode, so it is not a significant spoiler. I believe that would be a terrible way to die. Story 43. My sister-in-law died from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and it was a horrible death. At the end, she was sedated around the clock because she became so agitated. Her eyes were wild, and she couldn't move or speak. Story 44. I thought I was having a stroke the other day, but it turned out to be a panic attack. I suppose dying from a panic attack would be the worst way to go. Story 45. I believe it would feel like falling into a crevice, feeling stuck in an uncomfortable position, and having to wait to die of thirst without any relief from the pain. Story 46. Being trapped in a car as it goes underwater is a terrifying experience. I have had many nightmares about this scenario, and the feeling of drowning and being crushed is unbearable. It feels so real and lingers even after waking up. I become extremely anxious whenever I am in a car near bodies of water. Story 47. Any painful death leaves my mind capable of experiencing pain and recognizing imminent death. Story 48. A slow slide into dementia and decrepitude. Sitting in a nursing home somewhere, too weak to care for myself, attended by underpaid nursing assistants who can barely stand the sight of me. Screaming internally in my rare moments of clarity as my body decays around me. I am 45 and already feel like I am out of warranty. Basically every day, something subtly hurts almost all the time. Staring down the path of another 40 years of decline is horrifying. Story 49. Something drawn out. Something treatable but not curable. Over the years, you incur debt, suffer the indignities of not being able to care for yourself, and for what? To feel your body deteriorating. Giving out one system at a time until you don't remember what it was like to exist without pain. Thinking every new complication will be the thing that kills you, but it doesn't. You keep waking up the next morning, too early, and hitting the nurse call button. At least being set on fire will end quickly. Story 50. I read many comments where people write about drowning. After a difficult working week, I often fill the bathroom and submerge myself in the water. I close my nose and take a small breath. I stay underwater until my breath begins to run out. During my first attempts at immersion, I almost lost consciousness, but I love the feeling when I surface and take that first deep breath. It's like a drug for me. The release of adrenaline charges me with energy. However, I believe the most terrifying way to die is to burn alive, rather than suffocate from gas. Story 51. Staring into my lover's eyes while they stab me in the heart. The person they cheated on me with comes out of the dark and laughs at me. Then, she joins in and also stabs me before dropping me in the ocean. Story 52. Falling from a great height is my worst nightmare. It makes me think about death or an unjust execution. Story 53. I heard of someone who got stuck headfirst in a cave and spent the last day and a half of his life trapped there while people tried to rescue him. That's probably the worst situation for me. Story 54. After the YouTube algorithm recently chose to show me more and more videos about caving, I think I know what it's like. Being stuck in a dark, narrow cave, unable to move, in an uncomfortable position for days, and then eventually dying. Story 55. I once saw a video of 4 men locked in a car when one of them fired a rocket launcher at it. I can't imagine the fear of knowing you are waiting to be blown apart. Story 56. A sudden reaction is overwhelming, but the prolonged panic and suffering of being buried alive is incredibly difficult for me to understand. Story 57. Old age is something I do not desire. However, the worst thing would be to be burned alive. I may have loved my father, but I do not want to meet the same fate as him. Story 58. I have never died before, so I have no idea. I need to try dying a few times before I can decide which one is the worst, to be honest. Story 59. I know many people might find this strange, but I hope to pass away in my sleep. When I die, I want to have some awareness of it. I want to be able to prepare mentally and connect with the people around me, rather than just disappearing one day without any warning. That is scarier than knowing I'm going to die. However, I still hope it is not painful. Story 60. For me, it would be something slow and painful, like suffering for a long time without being able to do anything about it. It just seems like the hardest way to go. Story 61. I witnessed firsthand the torment and suffering caused to my mother when she battled stage 4 bowel cancer, an aggressive mutation that was difficult to control. We were desperate for anything that might work, but the treatment options were limited. Out of sheer desperation, we even looked into retreats abroad that claimed to offer a cure, but sadly, many seemed to be little more than money-making schemes. Story 62. Dropping from a crop duster being used to extinguish wildfires with an oxygen tank strapped to my back is the exact opposite of he died peacefully in his sleep. Story 63. I once read about cartel members taking random people to an all-inclusive beach destination. They would put these individuals in barrels, douse them in oil, and set them on fire while they were tied up, resulting in a slow, agonizing burn. When the bodies were shown in this documentary, they looked like charcoal. Story 64. Never dies. However, I think that drowning would be the worst. I don't know, though. Getting eaten by a crocodile would be unfortunate. Story 65. After watching Chernobyl and experiencing the devastating effects of radiation, one feels a slow and agonizing decline. This line illustrates the reality of facing a death sentence with a gradual progression towards the end. Story 66. One time, I saw a man who was thrown from his vehicle and pinned underneath it. The truck was on his lower body. It took over an hour for the ambulance to arrive, and we could only gather at the street corner and stare. He died when they removed the truck. I still share this story with my husband when I remind him to wear his seatbelt, as it has remained in my memory for 20 years. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.